Welcome to the High Impact Man podcast. High impact men from across the nation sharing their stories of inspiration, encouragement, and hope.
Seek transformational relationships.
What you're hearing from the culture is not right.
Pick up the six, you know what I mean? But you never know who your six sometimes is.
Stop being less.
To help others become the virtuous leaders they are called to be and that our nation desperately needs.
And we're off with another episode of the High Impact Man podcast. We have breaking new ground here, guys. Everybody that's listening to us, because this is the first ever video of the High Impact Man podcast. And now you can see our ugly mugs. Dial Up and me. We had our makeup done by our wives beforehand. And fortunately, Dial Up has stopped eating his Pringles because I can hear it crunching in the microphone. But we are ready to go. Now, one advantage to me in doing this is that I don't have to cook for Dial-Up. So now I'm saving some money on groceries. I will tell you, Dial-Up, the sink is empty. The dishes are done. So I still have cleaned up the house. But
it's good to hear that you're staying responsible as an adult there.
Yeah, I know. No food for you, though. Buddy.
No cherry Coke or cherry vanilla Coke for me either. So
it's still here. It's still here. So,
yeah.
All right, yeah, so we're coming to you from our own hovels. Dial-Up is across town in his own house, and I'm in mine. And our guest today is Dan Bout. He's F3 Legionz, man, he was another recommendation. Keep them coming out there, guys. I've got a list of recommendations. If you know you've been recommended and I haven't gotten to you yet, I apologize, but we're just getting through the list, and it's wonderful to get recommendations. Legionz has an incredible story, incredible bio. And he's going to tell you about his story as we go forward. He's been a real leader in many ways in the military and in Homeland Security and those kinds of things. So I can't wait to hear your story, Legionz. Welcome to the podcast.
Hey, it's great to be here. Great to meet you both.
Yeah, and Legionz coming to us all the way from the left coast, somewhere between Sacramento and San Francisco. So, and fortunately, our new technology that we just bought, all the gizmos and gadgets that Speely had us buy, are working well at the moment. So, we thank you for that, and we just pray it continues that way. So, Dial Up. So, anyway, my name is Nevin Gorky. I'm known as DFib to the F3 crowd, and I'm joined by Troy Klinger. He's known as Dial Up, and Dial Up. Here we are, man. We're video. Two faces meant for podcasts are on video.
I don't know whether this is good or bad. We might start to lose listeners and viewers now that they can see our ugly mugs. They'll be like, who are these guys? And we'll be done.
Yeah, don't be just too disappointed out there.
Our podcast careers will be over.
I end up I don't know why, but I'm looking at my own picture instead of looking at you guys. All right, I got to get used to doing this. All right, this is our first ever. We're working out the kinks here. My son's going to be really excited and proud because he kept telling me we got to go video. So here we are. So Jared, this is for you, brother.
Since you mentioned Jared, I got to just tell you a quick story. We are at we had a little team retreat today out at the Catawissa Boat Club. Mm-hmm. Denise and I both agreed there was a guy there that looked like Jared. Had Jared had a rough life?
All right, did you take a picture?
Denise tried to, but it wouldn't. She was trying not to be too much of a creeper, and she couldn't get zoomed in close enough for you to really see the detail and actually get to see what he looks like. But it was truly Jared had he went down the wrong path of life.
All right. Well, fortunately, my boy,
a little too much maybe smoking and alcohol.
Oh man!
But it did look like him. It was kind of funny. We got a pretty good chuckle out of it.
All right. Well, dude, my son Jared, did not go down the wrong path. He's much better than me. Doesn't take much, but he's much better than. So is my daughter Kylie. Both of them turned out better than me. Fortunately, the Lord has blessed us nicely, and our girl Sarah and her man Jordan down there. What are two little ones, Theo and Henry. So anyway, enough about my family. So this is the time in our podcast where Dial Up and I play How Did Our Guest Get His F3 Name? So Dial Up, have you given any thought to this beforehand?
I gave it a lack of thought.
Right.
I've been scrambling to think about what it could be, and I don't have much. The only thing I can think of is like you were involved in the American Legion, and maybe you were like the manager of a bunch of those, and so you became Legionz. That's all I got. Right.
Well, I told Legionz that he doesn't look like he's possessed because there was a guy that was possessed in the Bible that was by multiple demons, and they said call us Legion. So I don't think he's that. I don't think it was that route. So I'm going to say that since he was in the military, a Roman legion was led by a centurion. A group of 100 was led by a centurion. Maybe it has something to do with the military background, being a commander of a legion or something like that. So that's my best guess.
Yeah, this is not an easy one. So
No.
when I showed up for my first post, they do the normal in the circle of trust. Tell us about your family. Tell us about yourself. And then someone threw out the question, what's your most embarrassing moment? And, you get to my age and you have a lot of those. And so I was thinking about it and I said, I don't know which one to choose. I have Legionz. And then that was it. The cue of that day was like, bam, that's it, Legionz.
Right. Pretty simple. Pretty simple, but
That was easy.
Impossible to guess that one. So
Exactly.
we're going to give ourselves a little bit of a break on that one. All right. Well, tell us about your F3 origin story.
Oh, so, I live on a kind of like a small hobby farm, and, a plot near us came open for sale. And then we noticed this family move in and they started kind of building, their home. And so, just seeing a new neighbor in an area that's kind of, Spartan out here. I brought them over some bread and jams, and, we just built a relationship with them as they were putting their house in. And then when they finished building and moved in, his wife had mentioned, hey, my husband's always gone in the morning, he's doing this thing. And at the time I was just really getting kind of deeper into like my faith. And so I asked him, the next time we're alone, I'm like, hey, what's this Bible study you're going to in the morning? And he's like, Bible study? And I was like, you know, that morning thing? And he's like, do you mean F3? And I was like, I don't know. Do I mean F3? And he's like, it's actually a workout group. It has a lot of dimensions to it. And so, he is just one of those classic CrossFit, he can run, he can jump. I mean, Ponytail looks like an athlete. And I was always a power lifter, right? And so for me, cardio was how many plates can I put on the rack? And so I was like, that's great. But the last thing I want to do is go to somewhere to go running with a bunch of guys. And, he kept on me about it. And then finally, it was the day before Christmas Eve. He's like, look, I know you don't have to work. I know you're off. It's a Saturday, so it's an hour workout. I'll be at your gate at 5:00 to pick you up. And I was like, you're kind of out of excuses at that point. You don't want to lose face, right? Mm-hmm. So, we went there, and he hadn't really told me too much about it other than it was like just a great group of men. And the region itself, Rubicon, had only started about a month prior. So, I went and I got, pushed into the dirt and came out, completely into it, right? It was the closest thing I had to the kind of camaraderie I had back in the infantry. Just being out there with men, shared suffering and pushing yourself and not letting the people on your left and right down.
Very nice. Oh, cool. So you were quite familiar with the exercises and cadence and all that stuff.
Yeah. That kind of stuff came naturally, but the impetus to do it, that was, I was definitely lacking that.
Yeah. Cool, man. Were you in good enough shape for the first beatdown to not kill you? I mean, how'd that go?
I was good until I think we did monkey humpers, and and I don't even remember how many we did, but I remember at one point I had to stand up because I was like, I think everything is cramping, and I wasn't the first one up, but there was a lot of guys who managed to suffer all the way through, and I was like, wow, and that's really what you want, right? You want those people who are pushing you to try to do your best, right? Because you're like, that guy's not giving up. I can't give up yet.
Yeah.
Right. Absolutely. And that's one of the beauties of it, right? It's you're there to do what you can, but you're always push yourself a little harder when there's other guys around. So
yeah, absolutely.
And and our credo, leave no man behind. We leave no man where we found him. So hopefully, and I think that's the culture everywhere I've gone downrange to post at other F3 groups. So it's a great thing, man. All right. Well, this is going to be your chance to tell your story like we talked about before. I know you got a lot to tell, and I want you to get into all that. But one question I have for you is, I know that you served active duty Ranger school, so you're Ranger qualified. I believe that's what that means, right?
Yes.
And then I know you went to officer candidate school, and you made it. Were you? Are you still in the reserves? Or are you
I'm
out
still
now?
in the reserves.
What's your rank?
Colonel.
All right. Do I have to call you Colonel Legionz? That's a
be
good
the
one.
first, but Dan's always the zero Legionz.
All right. Very good. All right. Well, tell us what life was like for you growing up. I know you grew up in the Los Angeles area, so tell us about it.
Yeah. So I grew up on the very edge of Los Angeles County, back when there were still orange groves and, kids could ride into the foothills on their bikes. It's all infill now, but I was the oldest of 8 kids. My dad was an immigrant from Indonesia, and he met my mom here in the United States. And it was a little bit of a probably non-traditional kind of growing up, just because, being the oldest of 8, which is kind of, rare these days. And then also my mom was blind. So she couldn't, she could, she had degenerative eye disease. So when I was growing up, she could still see a little bit, she's since lost her sight completely. But, that required a lot as the oldest, right? To try to cover down and make sure certain things, went well with my siblings. But it was an incredibly supportive and loving environment. It taught me a lot about responsibility, a lot about leadership, a lot of things I took in later when I joined the service and then moved on into other careers.
Hey, cool, man. Wow, that must have been interesting. How many guys grow up with a blind parent? I mean, that's got to be a bit educational and inspirational as you grow up too.
Oh yeah, I mean, I remember my mom still tells me, when she still had some sight, we all knew obviously how limited her vision was, and the one story she just continually would tell me when we talk on the phone is every time I'd see a really nice sunset, I'd run inside and I'd grab my mom. I'm like, Mom, you got to go see this, and you have to see how beautiful this sunset is. And, she tells me she still remembers those sunsets. And, it's a nice thing. It's a nice memory to have that I got to share that with my mother.
Yeah. Right. That's cool, man. So, all right. Well, tell us, just take it from there then. So where'd you go from there?
Oh, so, I don't want to say a slacker in high school, but I wasn't a high performer. I was apt enough to do the minimum of work to get the lower B grades, not put in any more effort than I probably needed to. And, I hadn't even really looked forward to where I was going to go to college. And then I ended up taking the SAT. I kind of was one of those, the college counselor came by and said, you have to take this test. And my parents, having neither of them been to college, they didn't kind of know the process. So I signed up for it and I did outstandingly well. To the point where, the college counselor at the high school was like, what have you been doing? What prep course did you take? And that opened a lot of, avenues to, different universities in California. I ended up going to the same university my dad worked at, Cal State Los Angeles, because I'd grown up, going to the computing department with him, and I just wanted to stay close to my family. And so, I did the opposite I had done kind of in high school, being able to choose your own classes. I ended up in this kind of weird hybrid program they had back in the day at Cal State Los Angeles, where they had basically, they called it the Doogie Howser program. So they had all the young savants, kids who were literally 8 or 9, and they had to go through college courses, or they graduated high school and they're going to college courses, but they didn't really fit in. So they created kind of the special honors program, and they're like, hey, would you like to, enter this program? You got, really high scores. So I go into that, and so I'm going to school with kids who are literally 9 and 10 years old.
Really?
Yeah, but they were geniuses. I mean, these kids were absolutely brilliant. So they also kind of push you academically. And then, probably almost to balance out what I hadn't done in high school, I got really involved in student government. So I became the student body president in my sophomore year, and really kind of, trying to check all the boxes. I was the head of the student union, and really, trying to, I guess, prove myself, maybe is the best way of putting it. And that ended up really getting to my head. Where I started, I didn't have, frankly, the maturity to deal with, the kind of humility you need in that type of a leadership role. And so immediately my go-to was I need to go to a better school, right? I need to go to a school that will let me fully blossom. And I applied for a transfer to the University of Colorado at Boulder, got in, and I got in mid-year, right? So I start right after, New Year's. And so I fly out there, don't have, much to my name, and then find out maybe 3 days in, all the scholarships that I had in California didn't transfer. They were all California specific. Oh. So, now I'm scrambling, because the last thing I want to do is get loans, right? And put it on my parents, because they're going to have to co-sign. And I'm just what am I going to do? And then across the street from the dorms, there was a Amoco gas station. And they had a sign in the window, and it was like, hey, if you work here, all quarter, then we'll pay your tuition. And I was like, oh, I have a solution, right? This is like perfect. Yeah. And what I didn't know at the time was, and I don't know if it's changed since, but Colorado kind of has a at-will employment. And so very early, this was supposed to be 20 hours a week, and they pay your tuition. And what it ended up being was the manager at the time was like, I'm going to give you every shift, and if you say no, I'll just get rid of you. And if I get rid of you before the end of the quarter, you get nothing, right? It's not like you get a partial payment. Like you'll walk away and you'll have all that debt. So, I quickly became a gas station attendant who on the side went to school. And then in that process, just standard bureaucracy, even though the university understood the issue, someone within the school leadership had said, well, you're behind on paying, even though you have this payment coming in, that doesn't really count. So we're going to disenroll you and hold your grades. Jeez. And so, I found myself at the end of that quarter, basically, a gas station attendant who, was waiting for this payment from the gas station to pay for my tuition and disenrolled from the university. And I think it was right about my 21st birthday. And the only place I could really afford at the time was like a basement. And so I sublet a basement with 4 other people. So it was basically, not the greatest living circumstances. And I was really, instead of looking inwardly, right, and saying I kind of did this to myself, I was kind of projecting it out, right, and going, this school and all these people have it so well off, and they don't even get it. A recruiter, right, pulled up across the street because he's probably going to talk to someone, and he was in the Humvee, and a lot of people were kind of like giving him a derisive stare, and I'm like, I really fit into those people, and they don't like that person. And then just by dumb luck, one of the old Army recruiting commercials came on, and that was pretty much it. I called and said, hey, how do you get this GI Bill? And that was it. I enlisted probably 2 days later, and next thing I knew, I was flying to Fort Benning to go to infantry training.
Wow.
Dang.
So you didn't finish college, and you went off to join because you got basically kind of screwed over by the gas station guy.
Right.
So let me just back up for a second. You said you did really well in the SATs, and your counselor was a little surprised. What was your GPA like at that point?
I say it was either a 2.9. I don't think it was even a 3.0 at the time.
Yeah, I completely relate to that.
I was going to say.
I'm not a savant, and I'm not as smart as you. I didn't get the SAT, but my SAT scores were way higher than what my performance was in school. I think that's kind of common with men, though. I saw some kind of statistics like that. Like guys do better than girls on a standardized test, but the girls do better with GPA or whatever. But anyway, but that's an incredible story. I mean, you went through a lot.
Wow,
Did you think about going back to Cal State where you could have got your scholarships again?
I ended up, when I got out of when I finished my active duty tour, I actually went to Cal State Pomona, which was closer to my house. And, in the meantime, my dad had retired, so I had no real tie to Cal State Los Angeles. So I stayed in the Cal State system, but even closer to home.
Yeah. All right, cool. All right, so now you're at Fort Benning. I'm guessing that you're already used to kind of living in hardship because you were in a basement with, these other guys and had to deal with stuff. But still, it must have been a little bit of a shock to you when you first got there. What was your experience like in boot camp?
Yeah, no, it was a shock, right? Because I was, the suburban kid, played in the woods a little bit, but very little experience when it came to, just infantry life. And so the one thing I had going for me was I was, used to hardship, right? So I was, it didn't really bother me, like having the long hours, or that was all kind of like, hey, you know what? At least I'm doing this in a uniform. I'm not working at a gas station. So when you've been brought that low, it's very easy to essentially get rebuilt, right? And so a lot of basic training is, they will break down the individual, right, to disconnect them from like their prior experience and then build them back up with a set of skills and a set of camaraderie that allows them to be good soldiers. And so I probably had the advantage of already being kind of at that bottom, and so didn't need a whole ton of breaking down. And so that building up process and that kind of camaraderie you have when you're suffering alongside other people, that shared suffering really kind of bonds you very tightly to the field.
Yeah, I something I was thinking about recently. I had a brief exposure to the Army. I went to boot camp. I was in National Guard for a couple years. So my only active duty was in boot camp, right? So, so I don't know the answer to this. When you go to basic training. Now I know everyone has a different MOS. So when you go to your AIT, Advanced Individual Training, after
Right.
that. So the guys that you develop this camaraderie with in boot camp, you don't necessarily serve with them as you can move forward, right?
No, you don't.
So
at the time, they had like they called it OSUT, one station unit training. So everyone who was in basic would then advance directly into AIT, in the infantry.
Right.
And then based on where you scored, you kind of had a chance to select different areas. And I performed really well. I got promoted within basic training, to PFC. And then got assigned over to Germany. That was my top choice because I was like, oh yeah, Europe, that's the place to be.
Yeah.
Now, when you said you performed well, was it? They don't give you tests at the end of boot camp. I remember getting. So we probably went to boot camps. How old are you?
I'm 51.
All right, so you're younger than me. But it probably didn't change much. I mean, you kind of have to do a skills test or whatever at the end of boot camp to move on. But there's no other tests you take. When you say you performed well, was that in the physical fitness aspect? And then you don't get a whole lot of opportunities to lead. At least that was my experience. So what do you mean by you performed well?
So, back then they were looking at how well did you perform on the firing ranges? So everything from your M4 to machine gun to, grenade throws. They're looking at your PT score. And I think in my case, it wasn't just my PT score. It was how badly I did going in. I think when I first came in, I could probably do maybe 15 push-ups straight. I mean, that was maxing out.
Wow.
And in the running joke in my region now is how quickly I do push-ups. And it's, basically because the Army selects for that skill set and trains it. Right. So I had many, many years to do that.
Yeah. Well, so you were just this untapped potential. Yeah.
I was the classic, blank slate.
Yeah, that's awesome. Dial-Up, how'd you do on your SATs? Were you in the savant class?
No, I was probably average.
Average, yeah.
I can't remember. 1080, something like that. 1100.
I think that's pretty good.
Yeah.
All right. So, what happened from there? You went off. You're in the infantry now, and you're serving. You got deployed over to Europe. Is that right?
Yeah, I did. I was at a base that's now closed called Baumholder, Germany, which was, as I found out later, probably the worst base in Germany. And in the Army, worst doesn't necessarily mean it has the least facilities. It's access to the outside world. So, Baumholder was tucked away in a corner, probably closer to, more surrounded by forests and open areas than probably anywhere else in Germany. And it wasn't the pretty kind of forest, right? This isn't overlooking the Alps. You're just overlooking a lot of really mean-looking hills that you're going to have to march over and over and over again. and there was almost no transportation to anywhere local, right? So the Army probably wisely placed all the infantry soldiers as far as they could away from the civilians in Germany.
Yeah.
Kept you out of trouble.
No beer gardens there?
Oh no, there was a town, the town of Baumholder itself. I think we had one pub. You had the Army's Rod and Gun Club, which is where they played the country music, a discotheque, and a shawarma shop, and that was pretty much it.
Shawarma
Shop.
I didn't even know what shawarma was until the Avengers movie. Shawarma.
Oh, that was the place to go back in the 90s.
All right. Well, what happened from there?
So I continued to move up in the Army. I made to the ranks of sergeant. And then we deployed to Bosnia-Herzegovina. So at the time, we had President Clinton had just signed the Dayton Peace Accords to kind of, put an end to that civil war. And so my brigade was selected to basically be one of the leading elements moving into Bosnia to basically enforce what they called the ZOS, or Zone of Separation, between the warring parties. And that was probably even bigger of an eye-opener than, actually having been through basic training, right? Because you're going through basic training and you're, we can do this. But then when you start, kind of moving into an area that's been just absolutely wrecked by war, and seeing mass graves and seeing places that were, where rape was used as a systematic tool, of warfare, you start seeing that, and it really, it can't not make an impression on you.
Yeah, I can't imagine.
Yeah. Did you get in any fights there? Any
no,
combat or firefights?
The closest we ever got, and as we were moving in, ahead of you, because, as the convoy's moving through, and military convoys do not move quickly, you would see firefights out on the horizon. And then as soon as you got anywhere nearby, it would just shut down, right? Because nobody wanted to, mess with the Americans. So they were trying to get their last little fights back and forth, as we were moving in. But as soon as we moved in, it got really quiet. The closest we ever got was we were doing an inspection at one point of an airfield where, we believe there was a certain weapon set that was prohibited. And so as we're waiting for the gate guard essentially to let us in, we're at this fenced gate, we've got forests on both sides. All of a sudden, we start seeing people pop up in the forest on both sides of us. And, so back then there was no armored Humvees, right? So everyone kind of is getting in the flank and getting down and, getting ready to potentially get in a firefight. And then 2 Apaches flew overhead, and then everybody got up real quick and walked out, and the gate opened and everything worked out.
Air superiority, huh?
Yeah, absolutely. Once you see an Apache in person, it can't not make a difference.
Yeah, I'm currently reading the latest Mitch Rapp novel. I don't know how many of our listeners are familiar with that guy. He's a CIA assassin, but the guy that was the author of, in the beginning, that created the character passed away, Vince Flynn. And so there's a new author, but he was a guy who flew Apaches. So now in the Mitch Rapp novels, there's obviously a lot of, it's his first one, but, got to have Apaches in there and some technical stuff about Apaches and stuff like that. Yeah. Do the guys still wear cowboy hats? In the book, they talk about those guys, they're wearing the black cowboy hats.
So the cavalry still wears black cowboy hats. You won't, they won't be wearing it frequently in a combat zone, but, as soon as you get them back in the ready rooms, the Stetsons come on, and, that's a big thing for the cavalry guys.
Yeah, like Apocalypse Now. I think it was Robert Duvall's character wearing the cowboy hat. All right, cool. So what happened after that? After Bosnia?
So finished that deployment and then finished out my initial term, and so I did exactly what I had planned. Went back to school to finish my degree, and having kind of seen people who had committed like some of these acts, right? Because I'd worked with some of the UN forensics teams at the mass graves, and been around when, certain people were kind of brought into detention for war crimes. And, it really, it made such an impression because they looked like everybody else, right? I mean, this is someone, and when you talk to them, because many of them, were fluent in English, you would think that, you're just talking to someone you met at a coffee shop. And so in the back of my head, I was just thinking, what makes someone turn down this path? Like, how does this work out? Like, does something go wrong? Is it something they're born with? And so I had originally been in the hard sciences, and I actually ended up in psychology because I thought maybe I'd find the answer, right? Maybe there's something I can understand to make sense of how people end up this way. And so I finished my program and was looking for PhD programs. I ended up moving to Davis, California, and entering their psychology program. And that was really to work with a Professor Al Harrison, who's since passed away, who was just one of those complete eccentrics. You don't see many people in academics these days who have as wide an area of interest as Al did. So I really wanted to focus on leadership in extreme situations, right? So how does that manifest? What are the characteristics that help that, work effectively? Is it the same as normal leadership? There was just a lot of questions that I was looking to answer. And Al had done a lot of the seminal work basically for NASA, looking at how humans adapt to long-term space flight. Because the closest analogs you could really look to are things like, people in submarines and people in, let's say SWAT teams, or, these tight groups that are in very dynamic situations. And Al was an expert in that area. So, that's where I ended up to do my initial research.
Wow. That's pretty amazing. And now, when you mentioned leading in difficult situations and high stress environments, are you familiar with the GTEs that F3 puts on and supports? Are you familiar with that?
I am familiar with it.
Have you done one?
I have not.
Okay, Dial-Up has done one. I haven't done one, nor will I now because I've got some back issues. But anyway, that's the whole purpose of that. A lot of. Have you read Free to Lead and or Q Source?
I have. Yeah, they're great resources.
All right, so you're familiar that with Dave Redding, right? Dread, and so he was a Green Beret. So a lot of this stuff is based on the military kind of stuff. So, anyway, the GTEs for any F3 guys listening out there, or anybody that's not F3 guy, you want to first of all go to an F3 site near you, and then you get in these GTEs, and it's a really difficult overnight ruck that they try to put you in a stressful environment, and you get some experience leading like that. Basically, stress there is you're tired, it's dark out, it might be raining, you might be hungry, cold, or, well, depending on the time of year, right? But yours was raining and cold and nasty.
So, Legionz, curious what your first study that you did in graduate school. What was the focus of your first research project that you're involved in?
So, I was looking at both SWAT and fire rescue, like urban search and rescue, which is a subset of the fire, and looking for were there specific hiring trends, right? Were when you looked internally to the teams, did you see certain pre-selection criterias based on ability to handle stress? Was it tied to longevity? What were there any indicators, right, for who would be that next best generation for being a leader in these crisis situations?
Wow. So, that is interesting. That makes me think about, obviously you went to Ranger School, which is very difficult. I don't know if we're there in the timeline yet of your experience, but I guess the question I have for you, based on your experience and the fact that you studied these kind of things, what is it that allows a guy to get through a selection process, SEALs, Navy SEALs training or Green Beret or Special Forces or whatever? Because we hear a lot of people talk about it, that it's not necessarily the most fit guy or the strongest guy or the fastest guy. Obviously, it's the guys that don't quit. But do you have some insight into that?
Well, I mean, the first part, and this has to be acknowledged on the front end, some of it is luck, right? Because I have a lot of people I worked with, went through Ranger School with, who basically got so physically damaged because of the level of training that you're operating at. They break their leg, they have something physically that keeps them from doing it. But beyond that, it's your ability to, essentially suffer, right? Because if you have the grit when you've had no sleep for 2 days and, you've had to eat so quickly that you end up throwing it up and that's your only meal for the day. A lot of guys are just ready to call it in. And so, for me, because I can only speak personally, everyone has kind of a different story. For me, it was, I couldn't fail. I got put into Ranger School, and then basically I had been recycled, which means that you're selected to go back to the very beginning and start all over again. And that was absolutely devastating. Right. And in my case, I didn't think it was fair. I had passed all my courses and had kind of an interpersonal conflict with a Ranger instructor, but it really doesn't matter. Right. You have to either accept it or, basically leave Ranger School. Yeah. And so, I was kind of weighing those options when I was going through Ranger School. And then by complete happenstance, one of my non-commissioned officers, because I was a newly commissioned officer, basically was like, "Hey, how you doing, sir? I'm here in Ranger School too." And at that moment, I knew if I quit, right, everybody in my unit would know that I quit. And and so then it became absolutely there's no way that I'm going to give up, right? I have to finish this through. And so it was probably the perfect timing, because that was when I was in my little own internal crisis. Do I really want to do this all over again? And that gave me the strength to do it.
All right. Can you tell the people who are listening a little bit about Ranger School? What exactly is that? Because when you come out, you're not necessarily a Ranger, because that's guys that serve in the 75th Ranger Battalion? Ranger
Battalion, right.
Yeah, so give us a little bit of insight into what Ranger School is all about.
So Ranger School is considered a leadership school, which everyone kind of laughs about, because you can make it out of Ranger School and not be a great leader. But at the very least, everyone who's made it through Ranger School, they can endure a certain amount of suffering. And so, it breaks up into 3 different locations. You start out on Fort Benning. You learn basic patrolling. You get, basically, you go through a lot of obstacle courses, a lot of physical tests to make sure you meet those minimum qualifications. You basically go through a lot of infantry basics on squad level operations. And then you conduct those operations over many days with different Rangers basically assuming the leadership position. And in those patrols, you either receive a go or no go. And, based on your performance, you're allowed to move on. And then one unique aspect of Ranger School is at the end of each cycle, so at the end of the Fort Benning cycle, everyone that you've worked alongside that entire period gets to rate you, right? Were they shamming when no one's looking? Did they pull their weight? And then they rank order everyone within the squad. And then those are used basically to see like, hey, is there something maybe we didn't catch, right? Is there someone who's basically doing the minimum and they're not really pulling their own weight? And then that's repeated, right, in 2 different locations. Then Dahlonega, Georgia, with Mountain Phase, with mountain warfare specific training, and then finally in Swamp Phase, which is kind of a culmination, except it's in one of the most miserable places in Florida.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of swamp down there too. So that's interesting. I forgot about that at Ranger School. So dial up. I don't know if you knew this, but like the people that you're going through it with, they get to give you a grade basically and rate you. So you're peer rated along with what the instructors are do their own rating.
Yeah, that's very interesting, right? Because as you said, the instructors could not notice things or miss things. They don't have eyes in the back of their head, right? They're not seeing some of the behind the scenes stuff. So, that's interesting. Yeah, I didn't know that. But
I wonder how often the instructors are surprised by the ratings from the peers, compared to what they have.
I have quite a few friends who have since become Ranger instructors, and they're usually not surprised, but there are some that slip by, right? I mean, anywhere in the world, you'll find people who can turn it on and turn it back off, almost like it's a second skin. Yeah. And that's really when a lot of those pieces start showing up, right? Hey, here's the guy who took extra food, or here's the guy who never had to carry the 240 Bravo, the heavy machine gun. And those things are, when you're living as close to the bone as you are in Ranger School, they, people note those things.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you have to do any water training?
Yeah. So in the beginning of Ranger School, you do a water survival course where essentially, there's a range of courses. The culmination of it is they put you up a tower with a blindfold with all your gear, and then they kind of spin you around with your blindfold on and then push you off. And when you hit the water, if you drop your rifle or any of your critical equipment, you're a no-go. And if you can't swim over to the side in full gear, then you're a no-go. And a surprising amount of people have problems with that, right? They hit the water, the shock of it, because they don't know which way they're going to hit it. They just, they drop something and they get a chance to redo it. But that definitely is a selection criteria.
I wonder how you practice for that. Can you push me off this blindfolded a couple of times?
Yeah, and what all are you holding whenever they push you off?
Yeah, you're holding your rifle out in front of you. Yeah. Because and what occasionally happens is someone hit the water wrong, right? And then they're clocking themselves, at 40 miles an hour in the face with a rifle. But that's not an excuse. You still got to hold on to it.
40 miles an hour. How far are you falling into the water?
I don't know exactly. I mean, I think it's a high dive, right? So I think that's a standard, probably 10 meters, 30 feet.
You could do it, dial up.
Yeah, let's try it. We can do a seesaw over at the.
I've been swimming, buddy. I'm ready. I've got a goal. Yeah, it's side note, but I've got some spine issues, so I can't run distance anymore. So I've taken up swimming. I'm trying to get to the BUDS minimum requirement to get into BUDS to swim 1,500 meters in 12 and a half minutes. So. Yeah, I'm not there yet. I got it down to 14 and a half. I started at 20, so I'm getting a little bit better.
That's good progress.
Yeah. Well, the initial progress is always good, right? That's the hard part comes now. Yeah. Okay, so after Ranger School, so you're an officer in the infantry, an infantry officer. Where'd you go after that?
Oh, so I actually when I got out of the active duty. I'd started school, and I probably got to skip this step, but I got the call from the recruiter, and they're like, "Hey, where are you?" And I'm like, "What do you mean, where am I?" And they're like, "Well, you still have a reserve commitment. Did you even read your enlistment contract?" And that was the moment where I was like, "I don't think I did." And so, I had to start working with the Army Reserve. They didn't have any infantry in the Army Reserve, so I was assigned to a psychological operations group. And so, basically I picked up an additional MOS. So I became psychological warfare. And then, because of what I had worked with in Bosnia and Herzegovina, then I became an interrogator. And, went to school, got both those qualifications. That was while I was going through, my bachelor's program. because it's a standard 2 weekends a month. It ends up being like, 2 or 3 months in the summer because of the training courses. But at that point, then I really wasn't enjoying it, right? I didn't have the same sense of camaraderie that I had kind of built up when I was in the infantry. And so, on a whim, I was talking to a guy who had left the unit, right? And I'm like, how did you get out of this? Because you had a pretty, your commitment was pretty close to mine. And he's like, oh, I found the ultimate hack. I'm like, okay, what's the hack? And he goes, well, if you apply to officer candidate school, right, you transfer to the California National Guard, you basically, sign a new agreement, right? I'm like, how's signing for more time get you? And he's like, wait, I haven't finished. And he's like, okay, so if you finish officer candidate school, now you're an officer, and officers they rip up your enlisted contract. And I was like, oh, wait, if I succeed, I can just basically, resign the commission immediately? Yep. So I actually went to OCS basically to kind of, I figured, I could either get out or potentially if I did stay in, I'd stay in as an infantry officer and I'd be back to, the combat arms branches. And so I finished OCS right about the time I graduated, my bachelor's. And, sure enough, I absolutely loved it. Ended up being kind of the honor grad of my OCS course. And was like the first to fight to get to my officer basic course back at Fort Benning.
Cool. You're always outperforming everybody everywhere you go, brother.
Oh, no. I have a long history of underperforming in other areas. I'm just not mentioning them.
Oh, okay.
We're just hitting highlights.
That's okay. All right. So, pick up your story from there. What did you do after that?
Okay, so, I was at Davis, and actually that's kind of where I met my wife. So I was in my PhD program and, was probably spending more of my time doing military-related activities than I was actually coursework. But, graduate school, you have pretty wide lanes as long as you're doing your research. And so I was like, it was that time, right? I was getting close to my 30s. I knew I wanted to kind of find the right partner. But the one thing I knew is I didn't want to date anyone who was an undergrad, right? Because when you're going through a PhD program, you're instructing these general psychology courses, 300 people in a class, and there's just a weird dynamic, right? Where people kind of, you're serving almost in a professor-ish role.
Yeah.
And I was very cognizant of the effect that role had on people being interested in, your availability. And I just didn't want to, have anything to do with that. So I went and I didn't even talk about this for like 10 years after I got married. I went on Yahoo Personals, right? I put in an ad and I was all, I'm going to find the right person. And ended up finding this one posting. It was like 100 miles away. It was like on the absolute edge of where you could actually look. And it was just like, I was like, oh my gosh, this is this woman, stunning. She has it all together. And so we ended up, there's a whole backstory there too. But eventually, she agreed to go out to dinner. And then we were probably engaged 3 months later and married 4 months later. So,
wow.
We had to kind of advance it a little bit because right after I proposed, we basically received, I got no notice orders for what ended up being a 19th month rotation in Iraq.
Okay. There you go, dial up. There's your romance story.
There's the romance story for the episode.
Yeah.
Yahoo Personals.
I don't even know if it exists anymore.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah, Yahoo is still out there, right, as a search engine, I think, but I don't know anybody that really uses it anymore. Probably the same kind of guys that use AOL email addresses.
Thank you. I'm keeping the AOL email stuff alive, baby. Yeah. It keeps making fun of me for that. All right, so I'm kind of lost in your timeline. I apologize. So you did you serve in Iraq yet, or you haven't gone there yet?
So I'd served in Iraq once, and then this was 2005, 2006. So I had completed all the coursework. So when you enter like a combined master's PhD program, you do all the coursework. You go through your writtens, right? Your written defense, and that's what kind of gets you your master's degree. And then you have to, finish your dissertation. So in that process, that's when I was, kind of looking for a significant other, actually right towards the end of that process. And so then, I meet her, we have this whirlwind romance, and then, basically I get orders that I'm going to have to deploy to Iraq. And so, now we're at like probably, it's actually the beginning of 2005. So we do our train up in Texas. They basically dusted off an old area, Fort Bliss, that they used to use for prisoners of war. We go through our basic train up in this area called Donna Ana, which everyone used to joke that it was like the perfect place to get ready for Iraq, because it was probably the only place in the U.S. that was as miserable as Iraq. And then we moved over to Iraq, and then we started our deployment.
And you said 18 months was your deployment?
Yeah, so 18 months all in, right? Because we had our train up prior, that was at Donna Ana, and then our full year rotation in Iraq.
Okay.
Yeah. You probably can't simulate the heat that you experienced over there, I would imagine.
No, they couldn't. It was, nothing really simulates that heat.
Yeah, and this would be 5 years post 9/11, right? Or 4 years, 4.5 years post 9/11, right?
It was OIF 2, right? So we were the second turn there in Iraq.
Okay. And what was your role there?
So I started out right at the beginning of the deployment, I was a scout platoon leader. And then probably within a week of actually mobilizing, the member of battalion staff who had basically, been the S4, right, which is the logistician of an infantry battalion. He, had some crisis. He couldn't make the deployment. And so basically I got tagged, like, you're going to go as the logistics officer, which was like probably the most soul crushing position you can possibly have in an infantry battalion, right? To go from the scout platoon leader to the, not only is it a staff officer, but it's a staff officer who's doing all the beans and bullets, completely, not a great job.
Yeah.
But, it's the Army, so you go where you're ordered. And when I started that deployment, so the entire time we're training up, and then the first several months or two or 3 months of Iraq, I'm there as a staff officer, right? Making sure everyone has what they need, leading the convoys back and forth to supplies from our forward operating base to the larger bases, where we're the main supply hubs that are receiving all the equipment, and working as hard as I could to try to get up armored Humvees, because we all went there in slick skins.
Yeah. Wow. Did you get in any firefights over there? I know as a logistics guy, you probably didn't, but...
So initially, that was the first several months. What happened basically 2 months in to the deployment was I got tapped to take over one of the infantry companies. So, I was kind of selected by the battalion commander, basically went home on a real quick, everyone has kind of like a 2-week time where they're allowed to rotate back home. So I spent the 2 weeks with my new bride, and then went back, and then there was, the only way to describe it is there was like a huge issue, right, in the battalion. So I was going to take over Alpha Company 184 Infantry, and at the time, basically someone's was stumbling across, so someone was going through someone else's videos, right, on their laptop, and they saw a video clip where there was one of our Iraq interpreters was hitting an Iraqi detainee, right? So basically they were hitting someone, throwing him in the back of a Humvee, right? Both of which obviously not authorized. And this was probably only 2 or 3 months after Abu Ghraib. So the sensitivity, about the potential consequence of this happening were, existential to the Army. So I had already done all the work to transfer the change of command. I'd signed all the paperwork. I was the custodian, right? So the difficult part about being a commander, is just all the liability, because every single piece of equipment you're basically putting your signature on, that I'm fiscally responsible for this. And then everything got put on hold because, even though I hadn't been the commander at the time, right, the Army had to do a full investigation. The company was relegated to basically protecting the forward operating base, which is in infantry land, it's the lowest tier of the missions, right? To go from active combat, where you have your own patrol zone, to guarding the gate is profoundly demoralizing. And so they do the investigation, and actually, wasn't quite what it initially appeared to be, and the people who were involved obviously got prosecuted. But the company was, ready to go. They were approved. No one else was involved. And then basically, I get called to the battalion headquarters, and we're not replacing you, but we're getting someone else to be the commander. And I'm like, that's kind of how replacement works.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so they're like, well, we have this great commander, and we're going to replace the battalion commander, and we're going to replace this company commander. Right. And I'm like, okay, so, obviously my old role, right, on staff has been replaced. And, someone's coming in, like, do I just start the transfer of equipment? Like, how is this going to work physically? And they're like, oh no, you're going to stay custodian and all that stuff. It's just, he's going to be the commander. And and so you're like, how is this even legal? Right? This doesn't make any sense. And I mean, I couldn't even describe how bitter I was in that moment. Like, it was like, probably one of the most offensive things that like I'd ever experienced, right? Because I'm like, not only did you kind of besmirch everyone in the company, right? Because of the actions of a very small element, but now basically, I am getting denied the chance to lead these soldiers who I've become very close to in this period where we're all kind of seen as like, maybe the aberrant group, right? But I still have to be the custodian. I get all the bad parts of the job, right? But I don't actually get to be the commander. And so, I'm just like, beside myself. But, like any leader, right? You kind of internalize that and you try not to show it. It obviously leaks through, but you're like, okay, Roger, order's an order. And then the new commander kind of flies in. His name was Mike McKinnon, West Point grad. And so, when we do the change of command, the formal ceremony where they transfer, ownership of the company, I'm sitting in the back, just kind of like biting my lip. Cause, it was all about ego. I felt like I had been kind of, locked out of something that I had earned, and I didn't want anyone else to lead these people because I knew I could lead them better than anyone else.
Yeah.
And so the ceremony ends, and Mike kind of like immediately makes a beeline for me, and he's like, "I didn't ask for this, I didn't want this, and I really need your help to make this company run efficiently." And it really, it took me totally by surprise, right? Yeah. And he said, "Can you get me a patch?" And obviously anyone in the unit is going to wear the patch, but the fact that that was his first thing, that also threw me, right? Because I'm like, it was just such a strong sense of like, he had so much humility, right? Almost immediately, like all that like pent up like anger kind of that I had, it just went away, right? Because I'm like, this guy really, like, he does care, right? He is going to take care of the soldiers. And the only reason I'm really bitter is for my own like ego. And that's a real bad reason, like in a combat zone, to hold on to something that could put other people at risk. Right. And so, there was already a company XO, and there was a company commander. And so basically the joke was, everyone goes by call signs in the military. So we were Killer Company. So there was Killer 6, and then, you had Killer 5, which was the XO. That's the radio call signs. And so because, basically I was in this weird hybrid position, the joke was I was Killer 556, which is just, kind of slang for one of the rounds we use in the M4s. And so Mike was, he was a profoundly great company commander. He was a great leader. When he was tasked by the Army to go and take over this unit, right? He had been told over and over about how messed up this unit was, like how they'd done everything wrong, and you got to watch out for these guys. They're we're putting you here because basically they're just like, this is the trouble company. And very quickly he learned that actually wasn't the case, that it was a great and hardworking unit. That basically, had been, viewed as a troublemaker because of basically what happened to two different people, or what two people in the company had done. And so he immediately started getting us back out on patrol. One of the things he allowed me to do, because I'd been on, I don't even know how many logistics runs, right, back and forth. But, you don't tend to get in firefights when you're doing those logistics runs. You just get blown up by IEDs. And we were very heavily engaged, or we were frequently heavily engaged in southern Baghdad. And so Mike basically let me go on any patrol that I wanted to, right? And so I still had this, there was still kind of like this lingering sense, not so much in my battalion, but on a forward operating base, you have a lot of units. There was still when you kind of go in the chow hall, there'd still be the whispering like, oh yeah, that was the guy who's not even a commander, because, but he still signed for everything. So there was a lot of this because I wasn't the only one who thought it was unusual to kind of get replaced. So anyone who didn't know the story, right, like all the other officers, all the other units, I must have done something so terrible that, like, basically the Army put me in this uncompromising position.
Yeah.
And so, like, I just didn't want to be on the post, right? I didn't want to be anywhere near that just because, like, no one wants to be looked at that way. And so I just kept going on patrols, right, as frequently as I could, to kind of get out there and understand the mission, understand the locals, try to look for patterns. And and so that was the deployment all the way until the end of October.
All right. I think there's some lessons in leadership there, right, that our listeners can take something away from, and it's the guys that replaced you in the way they did it wasn't the right way to do it, and put you in what you said, a compromised position. That was not fair to you, not the right way to inspire confidence in the company either, but also the humility that McKinnon showed, and the lesson from that. I think that's one of the great virtues of a good leader, right? Is to having that humility.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Yeah. Thanks, man. Thanks for sharing that. All right.
Yeah.
All right. Well, take it from there. Where'd you go from there?
Oh, well, so actually then we get to the end of October in our deployment, and Mike and our battalion commander both were killed in a roadside IED. So Mike was killed in an IED, and as we were responding as part of the quick reaction force, the battalion commander just happened to be on patrol, went to go check, personally on his commander who'd been struck, and then was hit by a secondary. And so in the aftermath, there was a new battalion commander put in place, and then I actually became the commander of Alpha Company, and then finished the deployment as the company commander. So we finished the deployment. I came back home, and because that deployment had gone on so long, my professor had since moved on, and schools are like, sometimes kind of like businesses, right? They have certain lines that they produce and then don't produce. And in my case, like, Al was really the last one doing these kind of human factor leadership studies. A lot of the school was focused on, cognitive neuroscience, personality psychology. And so basically I was told, hey, you can kind of, you can stay, right? You're all but dissertation. You can kind of finish the program, but you're going to have to select a new committee. Right. And I knew that any committee that I had to select, I would not be able to sell on what I had actually was interested in doing research wise. Right. I had very little interest in traditional academics. And so I decided to leave. And then it just so happened, now I'm in the California Guard. My battalion commander upon my return was like, hey, you know what? That guy should be an aide-de-camp for the general, the commanding general of the Guard. And so, I got the shoulder tap. I completely bombed the interview, but I think, I had the ribbon rack that I think the general probably liked, and ended up becoming the aide-de-camp as a full-time position for almost the next 2 years.
I failed to mention, you put it in your bio, and you didn't bring it up, but in your bio you said that your only brush with fame was that you had the most widely read military blog post of the Iraq War. Do you want to talk about that? Yeah,
so back when we were Donna Anna, and blogging was kind of like a new thing back then. So I started out by kind of writing just like, basically stories of what was happening, while we're doing the pre-mobilization training. And then it kind of like, it essentially blew up. And so, I would log in like, every day, every other day, and just write in very generic terms, right? Because you're always worried about operational security. Yeah. Here's what it's like to be here, right? Here's like, here's how the day essentially operates. And, a lot of it was, let's say, more background, like what you see, how it feels, obviously because you don't ever want to get into mission details. And, but it ended up becoming like, such a big thing that, ended up getting interviewed by, magazines and newspapers and, The Daily Show and just like, places that, I hadn't anticipated when I started this. Right. And it was a weird time because, back then there wasn't any really rules on military blogging, right? Other than don't violate operational security.
Yeah.
And then, that changed probably right around the end of my deployment because it started becoming like a real thing. Like there was a lot of people probably who weren't as careful with operational security. And so, like, they'd be leaking things that potentially could put, their soldiers unwittingly at risk. Yeah. So it became a lot more of a kind of a, let's say, a regulated thing. But in that first kind of go, a lot of people were tuning in just to kind of understand, what is it like in Iraq, right? What is it? What are you seeing? What are you hearing? And I would put pictures like here's one of the villages we visited. So people got a sense of what wasn't getting portrayed in the news. Like, here's how the kids are playing the soccer field. Here's what constitutes a soccer field. And it had a lot of unanticipated, positive effects. I mean, in a sideways fashion, actually ended up saving my life because, a lot of people, Americans were reaching out and saying, hey, I'd like to send soccer balls because I can tell they're just kicking around something that looks like a deflated volleyball. And so we would end up, we would receive an entire truckload, and fill a light military tactical vehicle. I mean, you're talking about thousands of, so I was probably the most hated person in the mailroom because we were just getting these mass supplies.
Yeah.
And so, we would go and bring them to the kids and, and just help, make life a little bit easier. People were sending over clothes. They were sending over just, educational resources in Arabic, which I was shocked they could even get. But, they were, the American public has an enormous appetite for assisting.
Yeah.
And the way it ended up saving my life was we were out on patrol, and as we're in this three Humvee patrol, this guy comes running across the fields, right? And so the gunner slews over, trying to determine if he's a threat or not, and he's just running over and he's waving his hands over his head, and so he clearly had no weapon. His hands were up, and he's clearly trying to get our attention. And so we say, okay, halt the Humvees. And so, as soon as the Humvees halt, he kind of slows his pace down, and he's trying to be careful as he comes up. And it's one of the village leaders that, we had tried to help out with supplies. And, so we get our translator, and we're like, okay, what's going on? And he's like, there's an ID right up there. You have to stop. Right. And so, we're looking through binos, and we can't find it. And he's like, it's right there. And he's kind of cueing us in. And then finally someone's like, hey, I think I see it. So we end up calling it up to higher headquarters. And so the EOD company comes out to disarm. And then, it probably takes, EOD, they have a lot of missions out there in Iraq. So it took an hour and a half before they even got there. And then when they get there, they're like, you need to do a full, we need full security. And we're going to be here for a long time. And we're like, why are you going to be here for a long time? And at the time, they had to call in a special team, that was doing all the forensics on the IEDs because this was such a unique and at the time new IED, an EFP or explosively formed projectile. And this was the type of, explosive. And in that case, they'd put it in a quad pack inside styrofoam. It would have gone lengthwise through the Humvee and everyone in between, right? Because essentially when the explosive goes off, it forms a copper slug that's moving at thousands of feet per second. That's essentially almost a plasma. And it does, short of Abrams tank, it's going to go right through both sides of the armor. Wow. And so, when they explained what had happened, all of us were just like, wow, that obviously that would have been a bad day for everyone in the Humvee.
Yeah. Because you were helping out the community and you're giving them, kind of things they needed, and saved by soccer balls, dial up.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we're a little bit running up into our time limit here, but I want to make sure you get to talk about what you put in your bio about when you addressed your guys about taking advantage of the mental health counselors.
Oh,
and
yeah.
how important that was.
Yeah. So we left a lot of good men behind in the battalion. We took very high losses in our unit. And so coming back, we were in this first kind of round of mental health counselors being embedded with the companies in order to provide services. And so they show up and nobody's going, right? And people are just hesitant, right? And so in one of my last formations, I pulled everyone together and I said, all right, so I need all of you to take a moment, right? And even if you don't think you need it, I need you to talk to the mental health counselor, right? Because it doesn't seem like it, but what we went through was a bad time, and we're going to need time to kind of just adjust to those changes. And, you hear the general muttering and kind of laughing. And I'm like, and just to be clear, like I'm telling you all to do this because I'm doing it myself, right? I've already gone. I'm going to get those kind of services myself. And then that was kind of it. And so I rotate out into, future assignments. And then many years later, one of my young NCOs had then become a sergeant major and was retiring himself. And so we're just having beers after his retirement ceremony. And he goes, of all the things that you ever did, right? And this is someone I've served in combat with, spent, many years with. He goes, of all the things you did, the thing that had the biggest impact was when you told everybody that you're going to see mental health counseling, because nobody would have gone. Yeah. And he said, I don't know if you know this because you rotated out of the company, but out of all the units that we were with, ours are the ones that have had the lowest rate of suicide, right? Because we've lost in the years many soldiers that we served alongside to alcohol, to drugs, to suicide because of the trauma of those days in Iraq. And so, it totally struck me. Frankly, I'd forgotten that had happened. And so what ended up happening though, was when I had said that, like I'd gone in and talked to the mental health counselors to make sure I set it up, but I actually never went myself. So I wasn't being fully honest. I talked to them, but I hadn't gone to those services because in my mind, leaders had to be stronger, right? Yeah. You had to be a pillar of strength that, you had to take care of your soldiers, but you should just be able to suck that up, right? As a leader. And so I never went. And then when he was telling me the story, it clicked. I'm like, oh my gosh, I actually need this. I really need to take my own advice. And so then I ended up, dealing with, basically all those issues that had stemmed from that deployment, all the sense of loss, the, survivor's guilt, and everything else that had built up. So, had he not mentioned that at his retirement ceremony, not only would I have forgotten it, but I probably wouldn't have even, been in the healthier place that I am now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow.
Well, praise God for that. That's an incredible story. It's amazing to me how many, I guess it's not amazing, but it's just shocking, I guess, how many guys that have served over there that have dealt with those kind of things. Yeah. All right. And, in F3, we have a mental health month because we acknowledge that men have issues, they deal with differently than women. So we, just like you said, you got to be strong so you don't go seek help and that kind of stuff. So our message from F3 to all those guys out there is, go get help if you need it, man. It's not a sign of weakness. So thank you for sharing that. Yeah. I know that your faith is important to you. I wanted to let you touch on that a little bit before we kind of wrap things up. So tell us about your faith.
So I was raised Catholic. I met my wife, who was a member of the Church of Christ. And so I became a member of the Church of Christ, was baptized about a year ago, and really just starting to more deeply understand my faith. I was, probably in one of those roles where, I was like, of course I'm Christian. And, I know the right prayers to say, but there was no real relationship with God, right? It was like in a crisis situation, I might, say a quick prayer, but, I didn't regularly read the Bible. I didn't regularly try to practice, to grow that spiritual aspect of myself. And so really in the last year, it's been a learning journey. Some of it is kind of remembering things that I knew when I was younger and have since compartmentalized away. And some of it is just scratching my head saying, why did I not do this sooner? Because so much of what I was looking for is right here in plain text. Yeah.
Yeah. That's awesome, man. I've shared before that I grew up Roman Catholic too, and I married a woman who was not Catholic. And the first kind of the thing that happened to me is the Lord grabbed a hold of me and said, "Hey, read this," and I read the Bible, and that's how I ended up giving my life to the Lord. I believed all this stuff, but like you, I didn't feel like I had that. Not only not that personal relationship, but I hadn't surrendered to make Jesus the Lord of my life. So anyway, thank you for that. Appreciate it, man.
Thanks.
I know you have so much more in your bio that I would love to get to. I think we almost need 2 episodes for you.
Yeah.
For all the stuff that you've done. And if you want to ever come back, don't hesitate to call me and say, "Hey, DFib, we got to do another one." I'm all up for it.
Absolutely.
Because I know that we even get into, your work that you've done as outside the military, and your current job and working for the state of California. But But there are two questions that we have and that we always ask all of our guests. And one of those things are going to let you to talk about the last thing you told me, that the message you had for our listeners. You're going to get a chance to talk about that. But before I do that dial-up, do you have anything more you'd like to ask Legionz?
No. Yeah, like I was hoping to kind of get into this, his civilian life afterwards. But yeah, maybe we'll just have to have him back in a little while.
Yeah.
But
let's just back. It's we'll make the time.
Yeah.
Yeah. Let's just plan on it. It's going to be a couple weeks. I'm going away. I'm going on a cruise, baby. So
the cruises. Yeah.
My wife and I have become cruisers. So anyway, just pray no hurricanes hit the Bahamas while I'm in the next week and a half. So the two questions are: the first one is, if you were to pick somebody that you would say is your inspiration, a hero, somebody you look up to, it could be anybody from the distant past, somebody that you know, whatever. Who would you choose?
Oh, that's easy. So I would choose Cincinnatus.
I know that guy.
Yeah, you got to go way back in history. But I mean, here's someone who was literally given unlimited dictatorial powers in Rome, and he went, stood up an army, defeated basically the enemies on Rome's northern flank, and then disbanded the army and gave up the position and returned to his farm 17 days later. Right. And then it happened again, right? So then he goes back to farming. They come back again. They're like, hey, there's this, industrialist who's basically buying off the poor so he can become the king of Rome. And they make him the dictator again. He goes over, he puts down the rebellion, and then 20 days later gives up, supreme dictatorial power and just returns back to the farm.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was I think a lot of the men in the American Revolution looked up to Cincinnatus. I think that's what Cincinnati, Ohio is named after.
Yeah, absolutely.
And they had a Cincinnatus club or something like that. The officers from the Continental Army, I think they had like a Cincinnatus club or something like that. And Washington kind of did the same thing, didn't he? He conquered the British, and he went back to Congress and handed in his sword and went back to his farm. So then he got called back to lead as well. So yeah, great example, man. Humble leadership.
That's a first. I don't think we've ever had that one as
never said Cincinnatus.
As the man. Yeah.
No. Y'all look it up out there if you haven't heard of Cincinnatus before.
Yeah, I've had to start looking it up. When he said it, I'm like, who? Yeah. So now I gotta get it.
Not all the Roman rulers were bad.
Some of them had some heart to them.
So yeah, that's right. A lot of them had issues though.
Oh
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. Last thing is this is your chance to speak to the men of America. What's your message for the men of America?
So, the one message, and I think, I kind of sent a quote that seemed to sum it up, but it goes, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago. The second best time is today. And, everyone has this area where it might be a sore sticking point. It might be something where you've always wanted it and you can't, you just don't think you can do it, right? You don't have that faith in yourself. It seems like too big of an obstacle. And the biggest enemy you have to defeat is in your own head, right? You have to, if that's something that you care about, whether it's spending more time with your family, whether it's getting more a closer relationship with God, whether it's a position that you really want at work, you're working against yourself unless you actually just start some kind of motion towards that direction. Yeah. Every obstacle seems absolutely insurmountable when it starts, right? Like I can never get there. But the process isn't climbing that hill, right? It's not looking up there and saying, oh, it's actually taking that action, right? People can plan forever, but just that simple one step after another, you can't figure out what that next step is, then just try moving in some direction, right? Because it'll start appearing. But what kills so many people is they spend so much time in their head planning or thinking they can't get over something that they never even make that effort, and they've lost automatically.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. Good message,
said.
man.
Great message, brother.
Yeah. That reminds me of a few things, including that Theodore Roosevelt quote. It's the man in the arena, right? You got to take your chances, and you might fail, you might not, but you got to start moving forward, right?
Yep.
All right, and it's never too late. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate you giving us your time, because I know you're 3 hours behind us, so it's sort of middle of the day out there. And we're going to ask you to do it again, because I definitely need to bring you back, because I know you're involved with cybersecurity and a whole lot of other stuff that you got into, which we haven't been able to talk about. So if you're willing, we're definitely going to have you back.
Absolutely.
All right. Dial up? I think we just spoke to another high-impact man.
Yeah, absolutely. Just, thanks for coming on. Thanks for your service. Thanks for sharing. And do it
Thanks for
again.
having me. It's been a great time.
Yeah. Sorry it took so long to have you on.
Yeah, tell 88. I don't know if you run into 88 very often, but he's the guy that recommended you. So 88, thanks for the recommendation, and tell him that Dial-Up and DFib said hi, and thanks for the recommendation. Speaking of which, I just want to say a message to all the F3 guys out there. We got 2 podcasts that are looking for guests. I mean, 3. The COT podcast with Hello Kitty and Repeato. They're always looking for news of the nation every week. So call in. He gives you the number every episode to call in and do that. Bones and the Hunt for Wellness podcast, he's always looking for men to talk about their wellness journey. Anybody has expertise and things related to wellness, and the Stuff We're Trying guys, Italian Job and Tommy Boy. I spoke to them yesterday and today, and they got some guys in the line.
Thank you for listening to this week's episode. I would like to thank our guests for joining us and sharing their story of becoming a high-impact man. More information and resources can be found at highimpactman.com. If you like this podcast, please consider following us on our social media pages or email us at him@highimpactman.com. That is HIM@highimpactman.com. The High Impact Man podcast has a new episode every week, and you can find them on Apple Podcast, Spotify, and Google Podcast platforms. Have a great week, everyone.